Today's episode is all about managing something that we can all relate to: lifestyle inflation. That's when, as our income rises, so does our spending, sometimes faster than we realize. Lifestyle inflation can make it easy to lose sight of our long term financial goals. It's tempting to upgrade our lifestyle, but without a plan, those upgrades can quickly eat away at savings and keep us from reaching our biggest financial goals.
In this episode, we'll break down how lifestyle inflation happens, ways to recognize it in our own lives, and most importantly, how we can spend with purpose. We'll explore strategies for aligning our spending with what truly matters, so every financial choice gets us closer to where we want to be. Stay tuned until the end to see how much money you could be leaving on the table and learn a few simple tips to curb the creep. So if you're ready to strengthen your financial fortitude and take control of your lifestyle inflation, let's get started. Welcome to Financial Fortitude, a podcast for high earners, families, and business owners. We are your hosts, Michael Acosta
and Brady Hemmerly. Each week, we bring purpose-driven financial guidance to you so you can be assured you're on the right path. If you're looking to become an extraordinary wealth builder, let's dive in. Well, Michael, I am super excited for this conversation because I think this is a topic that we discuss most certainly every day, if not nearly every client interaction or meeting that we have.
No, it absolutely is. And I want to say it's one of the fundamentals of taking control of your personal finances because at its core, it's really just a spending equation. And so when it comes to just the lifestyle creep in simple terms, I think we should first start off by defining it for anyone who may not be certain as to what that actually is. So in your mind, how would you define lifestyle creep?
So I define lifestyle creep as essentially when spending rises to keep pace with your increases in pay. Essentially, every time you or your family gets a raise, instead of having extra money to put towards savings or leftover dollars just kind of hanging around in your bank account, you find yourself living paycheck to paycheck. Like, wow, I got this big raise, but it certainly doesn't feel that way at the end of the month.
I know on paper I got a 3% or 5% raise, but I'm just not feeling it. And so in your mind, it's really just because with our life being set on autopilot, it's really easy for that excess cash flow that ends up hitting our bank accounts or our retirement plans to get absorbed just through automatic spending.
Where do you see this manifesting in client examples? Like, where do you see it most often?
So where I see it the most is when there's this jump from, and I'm going to use an example of going from residency to practice. Right. And so if you think about someone who's in residency, they're making very minimal income, probably the lowest amount of income they're going to make in their overall profession, assuming they make it into practice. And so they get this 2x, 3x, 5x annual income. And the first things they want to start doing is living life in a way that they weren't able to do for the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Some of those big things that they want to take advantage of are becoming homeowners, right? That's an American dream. Why not go out and buy your first home? The problem that they run into, though, is that they end up buying too much home. So from a cash flow standpoint, the home ends up being well beyond what we think is reasonable from an overall percentage of annual gross income that should be dedicated to principal and interest payments, right? Or even principal, interest, taxes, and insurance based on guidelines set forth by the CFP board. Other examples would be someone making income as a professional and now wanting to go buy a nice car. Right? Those are probably the biggest things that come up, as well as just any sort of toys or gadgets, boats, things of that nature, where they're more luxury. But because we are making higher amounts of money now on paper, we have a sense of false security to be able to go out and take advantage of these luxuries that we otherwise wouldn't have executed on previously.
Yep. 6 months ago, we had no need or no goal for a luxury car. And then we get a raise or a big bonus, and all of a sudden it's super important to us. And I think that's where I see it manifest a lot of times in almost client mentalities, is this idea that, hey, we don't really need a budget anymore, right? We're making more money now. Why even bother?
Correct. And another area that I think is important to instill in your overall financial journey is experiences and travel, right? But there's been a new craze over the course of probably the last couple of years coming out of the pandemic where more and more professionals, more and more individuals, more and more couples want to travel.
Yes.
Right? Travel has become a top priority coming out of the pandemic because of the limitations. Also, traveling for concerts. Just think about where we are today and what we would refer to as Swifties, right? Individuals who are huge fans of the celebrity Taylor Swift, the artist, and will travel to different continents, countries, or even throughout the entire nation, just going to see this individual sing and perform. That requires a certain amount of cash flow dedication. And again, if you're just doing it mindlessly because you now have this increase in income, but you're really not tracking your inflows and outflows, you're going to fall victim to lifestyle inflation, or what we refer to it as the lifestyle creep.
Yep. I think what's worth lamenting on before we really jump into any of the details is, personally, have you or your family experienced this in any capacity, or have you had any of those almost guilty pleasure purchases that you're not super proud of and fall victim to it as well?
Yeah, I've had a couple of them, and oftentimes it's as I've continued to progress in the profession, right, and continuing to be able to support my family. But some of my guilty pleasures, one specifically, and it's really not that big, honestly, would be NFL Sunday tickets. So I'm a huge Chicago Bears fan, and being able to watch their games is something that I've always enjoyed doing, even as a child, right? Something that my father instilled in me. So a huge Chicago Bears fan, and that in itself is a luxury, right? It's not even a necessity.
Sure.
So that would be one thing that has pushed my lifestyle up more than it probably needs to be. Another one would be, because my family's growing, we're about to have our fourth child and go from a family of 5 to a family of 6, buying a bigger vehicle that can now accommodate all of us so that we don't have to leave a child at home, right? Because that would be frowned upon, obviously. So, like, those are the guilty pleasures that have been pushed upon us, either just based on our lifestyle choices, or that I've decided to dabble in just because of feeling like I deserve
it. And I think that's really the message, at least coming out of the conversation today, is not that, hey, we have to curb lifestyle creep 100%, right? All of us are human. All of us have certain things we really do enjoy, but being quite aware of, hey, there's should be a strategy behind our spending and a strategy behind the way our lifestyle develops is super important in the financial journey.
Right. Now, what about you? Are there any sort of luxuries or any sort of purchases you've made that you have had some buyer's remorse around?
That's a great question, because I think I fell victim to this very early in my career, which was both a blessing and a curse. So I came out of school and was not making terribly much income at the beginning, right? Like, hey, a starter job, starter salary. And as soon as I got my first bonus and my first promotion, the first thing that I went out and did was exchange my car, what was a very reliable older Toyota, for a not brand new, but newer luxury vehicle that I had a monthly payment attached to for the first couple of years. And the first 6 to 9 months, I loved it. And the next, call it 6 to 60 months, I hated it. So it was a lesson I learned early that a lesson I learned early is that it didn't necessarily change my life too much. I was still driving to the same job, still working the same career, still progressing the exact same way I was in the past. Now I was just paying an extra $400 or $500 a month for a car that I do love, but by no means need or needed at that time.
And a car is an easy one, right? Because one, we somewhat need to have a vehicle or some form of transportation, but it's a slippery slope because of the luxuries and the accommodations and the customizations that come along with them, just for overall comfort.
Yep.
And obviously, some of us have different tastes, different things that we aspire to have that we feel might hold more value than others. But at its core, vehicles are objects that not the best investment longer term, just because of the way that they depreciate when driving off the lot.
Yep.
So obviously, there's more to this than just, in most cases, just mindlessly spending, right? Some of this is inherent. Some of this are lack of skill sets that maybe we acquired through our upbringing, through the communities that we grew up in, just due to a lack of financial literacy. So let's talk about the behavioral aspect of this.
I think this is something really important to focus on, because this idea of lifestyle creep is just based in consumption. And I think the human brain is inherently designed for immediate gratification and a habit of consumption. Right? If we think through thousands of years ago, we got hungry, we went out and searched for food, immediate gratification. We're not hungry anymore. We got cold, we looked for shelter, warmth, convenience, perhaps. We found what we were looking for, immediate gratification. We get tired, we rest. And now we live in this world where there are 1,000 different avenues to go spend, or essentially to get that immediate gratification that we're looking for. And we're not necessarily focused on, well, what does this mean for us 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 years, 30 years from now? How are our decisions actually affecting what life might look like? Our brains aren't programmed for it.
Correct. And I would even say that one thing that is battling against us in our daily lives is one, you've touched on it, the daily assault on our cash flow, right? Because we're being programmed to spend through automation and save by choice, which is at its core going to set us up for failure.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about that here in a second. Also, the day-to-day life moves so quickly that we often just mentally want to get on with it. And so we're making decisions very quickly that can lead to devastation, right? It can lead us down a path that we otherwise would not have ended up on had we had more time, more sanity, or more overall thoughtfulness in making that decision. And so, because, like you mentioned, we were inherently programmed for instant gratification and have since transitioned into a period of time where delayed gratification is what's required, at least long term, as we prepare for financial retirement in the future, whenever that might be, it's perplexing because we're setting ourselves up almost for failure,
Yep.
right, as human beings. So, you and I often joke, and I share this with clients, that there's a couple methods to the madness as far as being able to address the behaviors, right? One is to improve financial literacy. What are you doing in your daily lives to just become more aware? Like, you don't even have to be the smartest person in the room. You just need to be the smartest person in the room when it comes to your personal finances. And at its core, it's really just a measure of what's coming in versus what's going out, right? At its core, that's cash flow planning. And so, what are you doing to become more aware of your spending? Are you using any tools? Are you using any aggregation platforms? Are you using a spreadsheet? Since the last 20, 30 years, a lot of personal finance has transitioned into a digital environment versus before, a lot of it being balanced through the form of a checkbook, right?
Checkbook or even cash in the wallet a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I'm out of money. Legitimately, I don't have any money in my wallet anymore.
Yeah, I guess I can't go spend any, right?
Yep.
Where today everything's digital, for better or for worse, whether it's credit cards or whether it's debit cards or whatever it may be, right? Like, most consumers are using some form of digital payment. And so, things that we can do to combat this, again, become more aware of your personal finances, what's coming in versus what's coming out. Also, the timing of when things are flowing out. In my observance of other individuals and families' finances, most bills end up coming out from the 1st through the 15th. And so that means that there's usually, depending on your payment, for your income frequency of when you get paid, there's usually more excess cash flow from the 16th through the end of the month. So just keep that in mind as a trick that could easily be a way for you to find cash to set aside. But also, shut off the social media. Social media and online presence, and the fact that data gets used from a marketing perspective against you, it's a daily assault. So we're being programmed to want to consume, right?
Yep.
And we can't do that if we're going to seek and attain financial success in the future. And that's just my personal opinion.
I would 100% agree. And I think when it comes to how do clients, how do individuals, how do families really begin to tackle curbing lifestyle creep or lifestyle inflation, we tend to find there's a more traditional approach to attacking the challenge. And then there's perhaps a more alternative approach where we'll spend some time on too. But tell us more about what you see as kind of the gold standard of traditional approach when it comes to curbing lifestyle creep.
The traditional approach that we talk about often, or at least discuss openly amongst ourselves and in our clients, is really making sure that you're doing a deep technical analysis on your overall finances, right? Think of it as just a review of your monthly budget. And not just any budget, talk about a strict budget. Like, you need to know everything to the penny of where your dollars are going. And in my personal opinion, that leads to financial anxiety, right? Because oftentimes, if you don't feel that you're staying as close to your budget as possible, because life throws curveballs at you and things happen and there are going to be erroneous expenses that arise, then you immediately feel a sense of failure. And when you feel a sense of failure, one of two things is going to happen. And more often than not, it's the latter. You're either going to be motivated to get back on the horse and to fight harder, or you're going to feel victimized and you're going to feel a sense of loss. And you're going to become unmotivated. So in my opinion, it's really not this mindset of, I need to have a strict diet, I need to have a strict budget. Budgeting, in my opinion, especially in a strict manner, is very similar to having a strict diet. It only lasts for so long unless you're doing it for a reason, right? Like, if you're going to be doing some sort of competition, or if you have a personal goal, or if you're whatever it might be. But strict dieting for the sake of strict dieting never lasts long. And if anything, the relapse is worse than where you were
Yep.
before.
Yeah. So I guess in simple terms, the traditional approach to curbing lifestyle creep is tracking nearly every penny, what's coming in each week or each month, and then tracking every penny, what's coming out each month. And then from there, determining, well, what am I going to cut out or where am I going to suffer to get to the mark ultimately that I'm targeting from a savings perspective.
Correct. And another way of looking at that is almost going through some sort of lifestyle detox. Right? Like, what are the things that I can trim? They're not necessarily needs, right? They might be more luxuries, they might be more desires, they might be more wants that I can trim to be able to raise some capital in my month to month, week to week spending habits. Again, it could be canceling subscriptions, it could be maybe stop buying the organic groceries and buying more of the generics, whatever it might be. And it may not be what's best for you, but it's this mindset that I can cut my budget out of this problem. And to be honest with you, that may not be the best course of action.
Sure. And that's what I was going to ask you next. How many clients or individuals truly enjoy that experience, at least from what you've seen?
Far and few between, honestly. And it's funny because I myself used to be somebody who, to the penny, needed to know where everything was going. And I was tracking actuals versus budgeted, right? And it is nice. One, when you have the time to do that, because again, you're making yourself ultra aware, and awareness is one of the key components to being savvy when it comes to managing your personal finance. You need to just be more aware of what's going on, whether it's spending habits, inflows, outflows, whatever it might be, right? Versus just going about it blind, which so much society is because everything is automated. Again, we are being programmed to spend through automation and save by choice, which is a recipe for failure, in my personal opinion. So, what I would ask you next is, how are we doing it differently, or how are you doing it differently with your clients for those that go through this mindset initially before they meet you?
That's a great question. So I think the effort that we take first is to really assess from a client perspective, who are you? Do you like that hyper tactical approach? Do you want to be on the hard workout plan? Do you want someone as an advisor or a professional to really keep you honest? Most clients, the answer is no. I don't want to make a budget. I don't want to spend time reviewing that budget month to month. It's not something that interests me nor motivates me whatsoever. So for clients who are like, hey, I'm tired of the traditional approach, the stance oftentimes that I'm taking is to really re-engineer what the order of operations looks like to essentially circumvent or almost beat that behavioral need to consume now to see immediate gratification. And through re-engineering what that spending pathway looks like, it makes it easier for clients and I together to say, you know what, we don't have to skip the coffee anymore, right? If it's my guilty pleasure, your guilty pleasure, go for it. We don't need to really work on what specific expenses are we cutting out. Rather, it's how are we going to manage after this re-engineering of what cash flow looks like.
And so what you're telling me is that I can't become a millionaire if I skip that Starbucks coffee?
Not quite. How about that?
And I'm being playful here because so often that's what we run into, right? It's this mindset that we have to always be a minimalist with everything. That if I go once a week and I get Starbucks and it might cost me $4, $5, $6, that because of that, I'm going to fall victim to or suffer the consequences of not attaining financial freedom when I'm ready to exit the workforce and my human capital is no longer there. And that's not really the case, right? And so it's almost a scare tactic in one way, and maybe it's a positive effect for some, right? But over the course of time, if you're not finding happiness in your daily lives, then it's going to be tough to manage your finances in a successful manner, in my opinion, right? Again, think about a strict diet. When you're on a strict diet and you have no cheat days, it's very hard. And I understand that personally. It's very hard to continue to stay motivated and to continue to track moving forward. So one of the things that's important, like you mentioned, is how is this process humanized? Let's understand some of the attributes that we have that are positive and what are the ones that are problematic. What could lead us to overspending in a specific month? Some of that could be stress. Some of it could be anxiety. Some of it could be exhaustion. Some of it could be the burnout. Some of it could be the people we surround ourselves with that are constantly going out and maybe they're in a different earning capacity than we're in and that we're just trying to keep up with the Joneses and so we overspend. Or it's what a lot of folks are falling victim to today, which is we sign up for a subscription. Oh, guess what? Fast forward 5, 6, 7 months, we're no longer using it, but yet they're still billing us for it.
Yep.
Right? That in itself can become problematic as well.
So let's talk through what humanizing the experience, what changing the order of operations, and what re-engineering that spending flow really looks like for clients. Like, how do you typically address it for those who don't want to go through the strict diet plan and work the Excel sheets?
Yeah, I would say the first one is just getting a core understanding of needs versus wants. Right? We've talked about that a little bit. Let's first identify needs versus wants. Like, what's the baseline minimum? And then what's the things that we want to add on top that just make the dessert taste a little bit better? From there, it's getting into this mindset where we flip it on its head and we say, hey, let's pay ourselves first every time we get paid. Traditionally, the mindset has been, hey, we get paid. We obviously have taxes that get taken out. We have certain forms of protection that we'll pay for, like auto insurance, homeowners insurance, medical insurance, whatever it may be. And then we have our debt obligations based on the choices we've made across our journey at this point. And then if there's any money left over at the end of the month after we've lived our life, we'll save money. And it's always the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to save. And some of that, again, is because we are inherently focused and designed for instant gratification. And so it's this transition of, well, if we pay ourselves first and we set it aside in a completely disconnected account from where we spend money, then there's an opportunity for delayed gratification. Even if I need it at the end of the month, at least I went through the exercise of setting it aside somewhere else that's maybe a little bit further than arm's length reach away, right? Because the moment that we get paid and it hits our spending account, it's basically going into a furnace to be burned up, right? Because it's going to get spent.
So, what I hear you saying is clients need to pay themselves first and set money aside. Now, how do they do that if everything's running through the checking account?
So, one of the things that we encourage clients or other professionals to consider would be setting up what we would call a wealth building account, right? Or a wealth coordination account. And there's a couple of ways of looking at this, but at its core, it's really just an additional savings account. And there's two ways of doing this, depending on your personality. One, you can have your income directly paid into that wealth building account. I'm going to call it a WBA for short. And then from there, you pay yourself a stipend based on what your actual monthly need is, right? We refer to that as a burn rate. What does it cost to live your life? Both needs and desirables. That way, if for whatever reason we fall into any sort of dire straits, we can drop the desirables and we still have our needs taken care of. So again, just to reiterate that, you get paid, it immediately, 100% of it gets paid directly to the WBA. And from there, you pay yourself whatever you actually need to cover your lifestyle for either the first 2 weeks of the month or for the full month, depending on your pay frequency. Well, what's going to happen over time is that you're going to have, you should, in theory, have excess cash that builds up in that WBA. Well, guess what? This has all happened through automation. So because you're automating this, one, it's one less thing that you have to think about, which is awesome because by the end of the day, if you're like me, you have analysis paralysis or you have decision-making fatigue. So if you've had a busy week, you've had a busy month, the last thing you want to do is try to think about how much money should I be setting aside into my savings account. But by this point, there's probably been something that's arisen that has triggered you to want to spend that money that was just sitting as what I like to refer to as floating cash in your checking account.
Yep. No, I love this approach because what does it do? It immediately puts any individual on an automated fixed income, right? If normally a family or household is bringing in $10,000 a month, and if that family or household is appropriately set up a WBA to capture all of their income, and then set up a recurring or an automated transfer back to their checking account, right away they're immediately capturing dollars every paycheck or every month. And then it encourages those clients to say, you know what, we are going to spend every dollar that's in the checking account before we overdraft, right? There's none of this guilt that, hey, we should be saving or hey, we didn't save this month. You've already done it, right? The effort now is just, hey, let's make sure we can get by with the needs and wants and then slowly improve what our wealth creation looks like thereafter.
Yeah, and it's almost like meal prepping if you think about it, right? Because when you meal prep, you already know what you're going to eat for the week.
Yep.
So the odds of you overeating start to go down significantly. The odds of you falling victim to the fatigue of having to think about what you're going to make for dinner at night starts to go down significantly, which allows you to have higher probability of success. And so if we're all on this journey towards becoming an EWB, an extraordinary wealth builder, which we know, rule of thumb, is saving 15 to 20% of your annual gross income, we can build this into this process, right? Phase one of this, as far as, okay, well, if we make $100,000 a year, 15% is $15,000. So what is that over the course of 26 pay periods if I'm paid every other week? What is that over the course of 24 pay periods if I'm paid on the 1st and the 15th, or the 15th and the 30th? What is that over 12 pay periods if I'm paid monthly, right? Like, we can back engineer what that amount should be through automation that's getting directly deposited into that WBA. And then, to your point, then it's triggered and transferred over to your spending account, your household checking account,
Yep.
right? Where you live your lifestyle out of. The other way of thinking about this, for those who don't like everything going into the WBA, is that you have it all go into your household checking account, right? And again, that's where you spend your lifestyle from. So your lifestyle is directly plugged into your household checking account. And then you just set up some sort of ACH or transfer, set up a reminder. It's a little bit more manual, and you move money from the checking account into the WBA.
Yep.
So it's a little bit more hands-on, but it can be done for those who are like, no, I can't have my paycheck go anywhere else other than my checking account because it's just too complicated. Yep. And one of the things that comes to mind there, which is pretty comical, is the Kevin Hart stand-up where he's like, what helps me with my friends is I tell them, all my money's in my savings account and I can't go participate in that because I got to move it from my savings account to my checking account, and it takes 2 to 3 business days. So I can't do it.
Yep.
But no, it's a matter of what type of safeguards or automations or disciplines or behaviors are you putting in place to help you find higher levels of success. And again, automation is your best friend when it comes to this type of process.
Yep. And I think the biggest impact of this more active decision making to automate savings can be a world of a difference in your wealth building journey as you progress through your career, as you make financial decisions, as life continues to expand, but you've still got the process in place to lean back to or to fall back on. Let's talk about what that impact looks like in real dollars or for a real family.
Yeah, let's walk through an example. So let's take a household where they're earning $200,000 annually pre-tax, and let's just assume that they're going to get a 4% raise annually. Right. Some people who's listening might be like, what type of job do they have? I want a 4% raise, where the others are like, okay, yeah, that's pretty standard. And let's just say that this household spends $195,000 of their annual gross income, and they allow the lifestyle creep, lifestyle inflation to increase by 4% annually as well. So if you do the math there, they're really not saving that much money, right? If anything, they're saving at a rate of about 2.5%, which comes out to about $5,000 annually. Okay. So just to reiterate that, $200,000 coming in the door gross, 4% raise annually, $195,000 going out the door gross with a lifestyle creep of 4%. They're saving about 2.5%, again, about $5,000 a year.
Yep.
Now, what does that look like after 30 years of this process, going down this path and not making any adjustments, assuming that this household receives a net return on investments of about 5% year over year over 30 years?
After 30 years, that outcome looks like $566,000 saved and invested, continuing to grow.
In my mind, if I went through 30 years of that, right, when I got to the end, I might feel a little demoralized. I might feel a little defeated. I might have a little bit of anxiety, honestly, because I think this illustrates a firm difference between what's considered being rich and what's considered being wealthy, right? Being rich is really driven or based off of how much income somebody makes. Being wealthy is how much of that income you're able to set aside on your balance sheet as opposed to the balance sheet of somebody else.
Yeah, and this type of experience can be discouraging or challenging because 30 years later, the conversation oftentimes that we're having with clients who find themselves in this position is, well, hey, you have a great starter retirement portfolio, but it's likely not enough to keep up at least with the lifestyle that you've been living. And the thought there is now, well, how much longer am I really going to continue to work? Or how painful is it going to be to cut my lifestyle back in the years where I was kind of hoping to live at large, or really just cut loose and spend now that I'm not working anymore?
And I'd say the ramifications of this decision or this lifestyle that was chosen or implemented is that it could lead clients or investors or households to take on more unnecessary risk during a period of time when they should really be mitigating the amount of risk that they're taking on, right? One of the biggest issues that this individual in this scenario might run into would be longevity risk, right? That would be one of the higher ones, meaning that they end up living too long and their assets running out, or their assets just don't last long enough based on their overall needs, right? Or they're one medical scare away from just completely eroding and depleting the assets that they have. So in your mind, how could we be more purpose driven in taking an approach that would lead us to a probability of higher success?
Yeah, so it's twofold there. In any purpose-driven approach, we really have to focus on what's most important, what goals do we have, and the why behind the decisions that we're making. Why are we saving? Why are we investing? Why are we trying to more actively automate or curb against lifestyle creep? For most people, it's going to be financial freedom earlier or in more comfort later in life. The second thing, as we mentioned before, it's really setting up a more automated approach to curbing lifestyle creep. And the example that we use is that WBA, or that wealth building approach, where we are siphoning off money into a savings account or paying ourselves first, and then ultimately spending what's left over at the end of the month instead of the other way around. So we use the same case study, right? It's $200,000 in annual income pre-tax. It's 4% raise each year. And in that very first year, we're saving the same 2.5% or $5,000. The biggest difference, or the only difference for the sake of this case study, is simply each year we get a raise by 4%, we're constraining how much we're spending by 3%. So as our income goes up, our lifestyle is still going up, but rather now it's going up marginally less than the lifestyle creep was before, difference between 4 and 3%. Same rate of return. Michael, what do you think after rinsing and repeating for 30 years that difference looks like?
So what I know is that it's going to be significantly higher than what it was the first go round of only saving 2.5% of an annual gross income over 30 years at 5% net return. Yep. In this scenario, by implementing that skill set, by implementing that automation of suppressing the lifestyle creep, even by 3%, this outcome is significantly different, to the point that it's about $3.25 million that this household gets to then walk into retirement with and figure out how are we going to spend all this, or what philanthropic choices can we make, or what type of legacy can we leave behind, and having a lot more financial security heading into retirement during a time when human capital is no longer there. So, these individuals might no longer be working. And so now it's really a matter of how do we make this money last us for the next 15, 20, 25, 30 years, right? And I think that's where our philosophy is a little bit different than some, is that it's percentage driven. So as our income increases, so should the amount that we commit to saving. As our income constricts, whether it be through loss of a job, whether it be through restructuring your household dynamic because you're adding dependents and one of the spouses is going to stay home, whatever it might be, you can always adjust the savings through automation by making it percentage based. So again, $3.25 million entering retirement, that's almost 6 times the annual wealth building opportunity from the first scenario, right? Completely mind-blowing to me, and also exciting. And it's attainable. It's just a matter of managing behaviors and setting expectations. And if you can implement the automation, awesome. And again, it's being more thoughtful around your inflows and outflows on a daily basis, just to keep it as simple as possible. Now, Brady, talk to me about some of the success stories you've had with clients where this has been implemented. Like, what's been the overall sentiment?
I think the sentiment oftentimes that I see most, it's twofold. It's number one, realizing how attainable saving is without having to go through the challenge or the exercise of the budget. Right? I think a lot of clients, when they meet with an advisor or they meet with a financial professional, someone like me, they're expecting someone to tell them what they can't do, can't spend, what they have to change. And through just a little bit of coaching and re-engineering what the savings structure looks like, I've seen a lot of success in showing clients, hey, this thing isn't nearly as challenging as you would have thought, right? It's fun to work out financially. And then the other success story that I oftentimes see is clients slowly beginning to see the efforts of their automation and their hard work and just how much more they were able to save than they were years in the past. Right? There have been instances where, hey, we've set up this automated approach. We control against lifestyle creep. We help fix income based on the goals and the needs that they have. And then fast forward 6 months, a year, 3 years later, and this client has $20,000 more than they ever would have expected in this account, even though they're making the same money and have the same habits, quote unquote, as they had before.
And that's life-changing, right? Like, that's real money in certain scenarios. And again, through my own experiences, it's individuals sitting down after a couple quarters, couple years of working together and be like, this is the most we've ever been able to save. Initially, I remember with some relationships, the philosophy, the approach almost being numbing because it's so uncomfortable because it's not something that's natural.
Yep.
Right. So you almost have to get comfortable being uncomfortable when it comes to taking control of your finances because it is going to require change. And again, we live in a society of consumption through automation. And how do you combat the automation? Well, you disrupt it. You disrupt it and you implement the appropriate form of automation,
Yep.
right? Which should be paying yourself, putting more money on your balance sheet as opposed to the balance sheet of others, right? Because the moment you give up that dollar for somebody else, that's an opportunity lost and it's an opportunity won for whoever's receiving that, right?
Yep.
So why not pay yourself first? So we've already talked about the pros and cons to this type of approach. We looked at the numbers, right, by running two examples. Example one versus example two. Example two offering about 6 times more potential wealth entering in retirement. Where does the power of accountability fit into all this?
I think keeping yourself personally accountable to the goals that you have is super important through all of this, right? The effort of the conversations we have with clients about this topic is really foundationally built on personal discipline and accountability, right? At the end of the day, we can get really serious about budgeting. At the end of the day, we can get really serious about re-engineering our savings approach and paying ourselves first. And that's great. If 3 or 6 months go by and we haven't stayed accountable to the goals that we've put in place, the structures that we now have, a lot of it can all be for naught, right? So I think it's easy at the end of the month to give yourself a little too much grace and just put things on the credit card and say, hey, I'll get to that next month. Or it's easy to say, you know what? I'm not too concerned about what happened the last 2 weeks. But I think it's super important to have clear and concise goals and have those goals really drive the behavior and the accountability that goes into this
into this approach, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're giving yourself a framework. And the framework itself, the template itself can be the accountability that you need, right? It doesn't have to be a financial advisor. It doesn't have to be your parents. You know, it would be awesome if it's your spouse because I think that that's important personally. That's my own personal bias there. But again, when it comes to the accountability, there's so many things that could be used as a form of accountability beyond yourself. Because as you mentioned, it's very easy when we hold ourselves accountable on our own to fall victim to giving ourselves too much grace. Yep. Right, too much mercy, which then leads to a leniency around how we actually spend. And it can lead to a cascading demise financially of accruing too much debt or making poor financial decisions or delaying the gratification that comes to being able to check off a personal goal that we had, that we were working towards, whether it's saving for the down payment on a first home, right? For anyone who's been working for the past 3 to 5 to 6 years with the goal in mind of being able to purchase a home and trying to combat the overall inflation that's occurred with homes, like they may have continued to have to kick this can down the road because it just hasn't come to fruition yet, right? Because of the lifestyle creep. Some of it by their own accord and some of it just because of what's going on externally, economically,
Yep.
right? Another goal that you might be able to check off would be saving for your child's higher education. What does that look like? Or being able to leave them a legacy or a gift, or preparing prudently for yourself, you and your spouse, or you if you're a single parent, so that you don't become a financial burden on your children. A lot of this stems from not only having the framework and template of, okay, well, these are my purpose-driven decisions that I'm going to make with my hard-earned income, and this is how I'm going to dedicate it and allocate it whenever I get a large commission, a large bonus, a large windfall. This is how I'm going to allocate it accordingly based on an order of operation, with the first step in that order of operation, paying yourself first.
Yep. Yeah, and staying accountable is the biggest thing there, right? Because every day you've got to wake up and keep making those decisions on an ongoing basis. It's easier to spend the money first. For all of us, it is. I feel and think the same way. Wouldn't it be nice, or wouldn't it be fun or easier if I just got paid every dollar that I earned that week or that month?
No, absolutely. Now, I will say, when you have that personal trainer that's holding your feet to the fire and saying, hey, you're not giving me 120%, then we motivate ourselves a little bit more. We feel a little bit more motivated when we have somebody that's truly holding us accountable. And that's where working with an external being can be beneficial, whether it's a financial advisor, whether it's a financial coach, whether it's your significant other, whether it's a coworker, whatever it might be, someone who you feel adds value to you financially, that is guiding you as a Sherpa along the way on your financial journey. So in your mind, what are the biggest takeaways from today's episode?
I think the biggest takeaways from today's episode is, first and foremost, understanding that all of us are human, right? Our brains are not wired to be Excel sheets. So a lot of your financial decision making comes down to, well, who am I as a human? And what are the best ways for me to target what I know is ultimately a challenge? It's my human nature. It's okay to fail sometimes. It's okay to have cheat days, but it's really about knowing who I am, what's important to me, and what direction that I need to take to organize things. I think another big takeaway is everyone's needs, wants, desires, everyone's lifestyle creep is going to manifest differently. One individual might want the new car, that's their goal, or that's the creep in some instances. Other individuals are taking trips all over the place. It's a matter of who you are and that everything's going to look a little bit different. And then the other big takeaways are there are more than one way to approach a problem, right? We could go the traditional budgeting route. We could go the wealth building account or the surge protector method. We could go a mix of the two. But really, the biggest takeaway is beyond unique abilities, beyond one size fits all, structure is oftentimes better or best compared to habits, right? And the way that we really level up is through automating what our financial situation looks like.
Yeah, of course. And going back to a behavioral aspect of this, if we can automate our lifestyle, we're only going to improve or increase the odds of success, the probabilities of success. And that's no different than the way that our brain operates as we continue to evolve as humans in society.
Yep.
Trying to keep us safe, trying to go and make a quick decision based off of previous experiences, right? Like we know that as humans, we have a limited capacity for thinking because of all the distractions of the world, whether it's our jobs, whether it's family commitments, whether it's the guerrilla marketing that's sent against us to attack our hard-earned dollars. And so we have to understand that how are we going to set ourselves up for success, knowing that when our brain is processing information, there's really two systems for processing that information, right? And to keep it simple, system one is really thinking intuitively, quickly, automatic, and just swift. And system two thinking is more deliberate, it's more slow, it's more effortful. And so how do we then take the time when we don't want to make sure that we're making a solid decision based on what's the real purpose of these dollars? Yep. And it's going back to that template that you referenced and the discipline and the accountability, which is what we want for everybody out there.
So if today's episode got you thinking about your own spending habits, take a moment to reflect, identify one area you may be experiencing lifestyle inflation, and consider a small change you can make to redirect that spending toward a long-term goal. And remember, it's all about purpose. When you align your financial choices with what truly matters, you're building a strong foundation for financial freedom and resilience.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Financial Fortitude. If you find this episode helpful, please like, leave a review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. For more valuable insights, visit us at www.genesiswealthplanning.com/podcast. We'll be back soon with more insights to help you make purpose-driven financial choices. Until then, keep building your financial fortitude.
Are you considering hiring a financial advisor? If so, be sure to listen to episode 1 of Financial Fortitude. In this episode, we discuss the reasons why many people choose to hire a financial advisor and highlight the key qualities you should look for in the financial professional you decide to work with.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Genesis Wealth Planning LLC, and opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. All scenarios and names mentioned herein are purely fictional and have been created solely for educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing situations, persons, or fictional characters is coincidental. The information presented should not be used as the basis for any specific investment advice. Michael Acosta and Brady are registered representatives and financial advisors of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. Securities products and advisory services offered through Park Avenue Securities, member FINRA, SIPC. Financial representatives of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Park Avenue Securities is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Consolidated Planning Group, Inc. and Genesis Wealth Planning, LLC are not affiliates or subsidiaries of Park Avenue Securities or Guardian. Michael Acosta's California Insurance License Number 0M50974 and Brady Hammerly's California Insurance License Number 4353077 7237198.1. Expiration 1226.